My name is Evan Amato, and you are watching Develop with Dante, where we look at the Divine Comedy through the lens of self-development. If you have not seen the intro video to this series, then I highly recommend that you go check it out because it will tell you exactly what we are doing here. But if you have seen it, then welcome. You know exactly what this series is about. And you know that today we are diving into the first terrace of purgatory, which is the terrace of pride. Now, if you remember well from the first intro video, you'll know that Dante's Purgatory is a mountain that is hardest to climb in the beginning. That means that pride, being the first sin, is the hardest sin to overcome. And from a theological perspective here, Dante really isn't reinventing the wheel, okay? In Christian thought, pride is called the satanic sin because it's the sin that caused Lucifer to rebel against God. It's also the foundational sin. It's the sin from which all other sins stem. So, that being said, let's go ahead and dive into this first terrace and check out exactly what Dante has to teach us about pride. How does pride harm us? To answer that question, what we need to do is to go right into the first tier of purgatory and see what Dante observes about the souls living there. What he sees is that these souls are carrying out a very specific action. And that action is that they are heaving these huge, heavy boulders over their head, and they're forced to walk with them. And this is symbolic of two specific things. The first is that pride impedes us. It slows us down. It stops us from getting where we want to go. And regardless of whatever we're doing, if we're doing it with pride, it's gonna go a lot slower. It's gonna impede us from getting where we need to go. This can play out in a couple different ways. Whether it's replying to a colleague with a snarky email because something they said hurt our pride, or whether it's simply, being in a relationship and being in an argument and not having really the wherewithal to acknowledge the fact that you're wrong. Pride, as you can see, can clearly really hurt us in a lot of different ways. And it stops us from achieving what we most want, which is that heaven, spiritual or secular, it's that place of love, success, and meaning. The second image that Dante's symbolism provides us is that of being blinded by pride. As you can probably imagine, if you are carrying a giant boulder over your back, you're almost parallel to the ground, and you cannot see fully around you. What Dante is saying with this image then is that pride blinds us because it stops us from seeing where we need to go. Pride blinds us because it does not allow us to accurately assess ourselves, to analyze the areas in which we need to grow, and then to go out and pursue them. So, on two fronts, just in the sense of, whatever we're doing, if we're doing it with pride, it's going to be slowing us down. That's one element. But on the other side, it's saying that more than just that, what pride does is it blinds us because it doesn't allow us to have an accurate analysis of who we are, accurate self-knowledge. And for that reason, we're not able to develop as we should as individuals. So, what is Dante's insight regarding pride? And what does he teach us in terms of how we can take his insight to apply it to our lives? Well, the first thing that Dante recommends is that we practice recognizing our pride. Practice identifying it, even in somewhat silly and arbitrary situations. I'll give you an example of this. Dante comes across this guy in purgatory who is very, very prideful, and he is practicing not being prideful. And basically what the man says is this. He says, "I was Italian, son of a great Tuscan. My father was Guglielmo Aldobrandesco." And then he kind of pauses, becomes self-aware for a sec. And he says, "I do not know if you have heard his name." And now this guy, again, comically catches himself in the middle of being very prideful. But Dante actually kind of gives him credit. What he's saying is we need to practice catching ourselves in the midst of being prideful, because only by recognizing, where we have room for improvement, that is where we start to improve. So that is the first tool that Dante gives us, the first piece of insight. The second main piece of insight that Dante gives us in terms of overcoming pride is something that he uses at all the different terraces of purgatory. And that is to take a sin and to practice beholding examples of its corresponding opposite virtue. That means that for this terrace of pride, the opposite corresponding virtue is humility. And Dante provides this with two examples. As he'll do in all the terraces of purgatory, he'll provide us an example from the life of the Virgin Mary. Apart from that, he also gives us some examples from classical literature and classical mythology. And so the first example that he gives is the example of the Virgin Mary at the Annunciation. This is where Gabriel comes and says, "Blessed art thou among women, you are going to be the mother of God." And Mary, instead of putting up this big fight about it, she says, "I am your humble servant, let your will be done." Example of humility, according to Dante. Another example that he gives is the example of the Roman Emperor Trajan, who at one point was traveling across Italy, and he obviously, this big campaign, an army, the ruler of the world, very important guy, but this widow comes to him and asks him to do something for her in order to enact justice. And instead of simply writing her off as someone who's not important to the overall, happenings of the empire, what Trajan does is he actually drops everything he's doing, stops, and goes and administers justice to this woman. An example of humility. Now, the reason Dante suggests that we behold these examples of virtue is because he recognizes that whatever it is that we focus on, whatever it is that we meditate on, whatever it is that we invest our mental energy in, that is what we eventually come to live out and to enact in our lives. Okay, that is what we become. And so Dante understands that something very core to the human experience is that in order to cultivate virtue, we have to meditate on it, we have to behold it, we have to focus on it. And so that's why the souls in purgatory, in this specific terrace of purgatory, the one of pride, they are, in addition to carrying boulders over their heads, they are also beholding these examples of virtue. And that is the suggestion that Dante gives to us as well. As Dante finally exits this first terrace of purgatory and he moves up to the second, what he finds is an angel. And this angel blesses the souls of all who pass from the first terrace to the second. And he gives a blessing in the form of a beatitude. And this beatitude is simply, as Dante puts it, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," which leaves us, the listeners, to fill in, "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, if you don't know, just as a side note, these Beatitudes come from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And they are in this form: the "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." We'll get a different one at each stage of purgatory. But what's really interesting about this, and why I'd like to end with this Beatitude, is because it points out something that's a deeper, almost spiritual reality about life, which is that there's something very, very transcendental and very transformative about humility. Because if we take our secular definition of heaven and look at it through the lens of something that, is the place where we want to be, that's full of love and success and meaning, that means in order to get there, it all starts with humility. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Humility is essential, and Dante points it out. I really hope you enjoyed this dive into the first terrace of purgatory. As you can see, Dante has a ton of practical value that he can contribute to your life to help make it better and to help teach you the age-old archetypes of self-development. Join us for the next video as we dive into the second terrace of purgatory, the terrace of envy. Join us as we continue to improve as individuals, and join us as we develop with Dante.